Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly in the dim lobby of a downtown corporate office. A lone security guard leaned against the desk, scrolling through his phone, unaware of the figure who had just entered. Dressed in a faded jacket, baggy jeans, and an oversized hoodie, the man blended in with the late-night stragglers of the city. He paused near the guard, head tilted slightly, as if waiting for something. "Hey, you! What do you want?" barked the guard, his tone sharp, dismissive. The man straightened but said nothing. A flicker of recognition flashed across his face before he tucked it away. He stepped closer, sliding his hands into his pockets, and muttered, "Just looking for a chance." The guard scoffed, shaking his head as he returned to his phone, muttering under his breath. "Yeah, good luck with that." The man took one last look at him before walking away, the faintest hint of a smirk on his lips. What happens next will leave you speechless. From where you're watching this video, let us know in the comments below. The city never truly slept, and neither did its people. In the heart of downtown London, where the hustle of life collided with the loneliness of night shifts, Big Shaq walked unnoticed. The man known for his viral humor and catchy music hits had traded his flamboyant persona for an unassuming disguise. With a weathered jacket that looked 2 sizes too big, scruffy sneakers, and a wool cap pulled low over his head, he was unrecognizable. It wasn't the cameras, flashing lights, or screaming fans he was after tonight. This mission was personal. Shaq had been thinking about his past. How the moments that shaped him weren't always the applause or the fame, but the struggles. The years in school where he was ridiculed for not fitting in, for his humor that no one understood, and his dreams that no one believed in. And then there was Terry. Terry wasn't just another bully. He was the bully. The one who turned lunch breaks into nightmares and whispers in hallways into humiliation. Shaq had long since moved on, or at least that's what he told himself. But when he found out through a mutual acquaintance that Terry now worked as a security guard, he felt something stir within him. What were the odds? The man who once towered over him, physically and emotionally, was now standing guard at an office building, living an ordinary life. Shaq couldn't resist. It wasn't about revenge. He had no intention of stooping to his level, but there was something about the universe giving him this chance, this moment to see if people truly change, that Shaq couldn't ignore. The office building was nothing special, just a standard glass and concrete structure that lit up the otherwise dark street. Shaq pulled the cap lower as he pushed open the heavy glass door, stepping into the bright, empty lobby. His eyes scanned the room, and there he was, Terry. Time had been kinder to him than Shaq expected. He still had the same broad shoulders and square jaw, but there was something different now, an air of fatigue or perhaps resignation. Terry looked up briefly, his eyes narrowing at the sight of Shaq. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone clipped. Shaq hesitated, lowering his voice. "Just looking for some work," he mumbled, his accent slightly exaggerated to mask his identity. Terry gave him a once-over, clearly unimpressed. "We're not hiring. Try somewhere else." Shaq didn't leave immediately. He lingered, observing the man who had once been a tyrant in his life. Was Terry still the same, or had life taught him lessons that Shaq could never have imagined? As he left the building, Shaq felt a mix of emotions. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but something told him this night wasn't over. The real question was, how far had Terry come, and what would happen when Terry's past came face to face with his present? The following night, Shaq returned to the office building, his disguise still intact. This time, he carried a small backpack, its contents rattling faintly with every step. He waited until the lobby was empty before walking in, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. The familiar buzz of fluorescent lights filled the air as he spotted Terry at the desk, scrolling through his phone again. Terry glanced up, visibly annoyed. "You again? I thought I told you we're not hiring." Shaq offered a small, nervous chuckle, his voice deliberately soft. "I wasn't looking for a job. Just figured I'd stop by. The streets can be a little rough at night, you know." Terry frowned, suspicion flashing across his face. "This ain't a shelter, mate. You can't just hang around here." Shaq held up his hands, backing off slightly. "No trouble, I promise. Just need a place to sit for a bit." He pointed toward a bench near the entrance, its metal frame cold and uninviting. Terry sighed, clearly torn between kicking him out and letting him stay. After a long pause, he waved a dismissive hand. "Fine, just don't cause any problems," Terry muttered, returning his attention to his phone. Shaq took a seat on the bench, watching the lobby from the corner of his eye. He could see Terry's posture, rigid and tense, even when he wasn't looking directly at him. It was clear the guard didn't trust him. But that didn't bother Shaq. He wasn't here to make friends. He was here to learn. Over the next hour, Shaq observed as a few late-night workers filtered in and out of the building. Terry greeted some with a nod, others with curt indifference. When a young man in a suit accidentally bumped into the desk, spilling a coffee cup onto the floor, Terry's reaction was immediate. "Boy, watch where you're going," he snapped, his tone harsh. The man apologized profusely, bending down to clean up the mess with trembling hands. Terry crossed his arms, watching him with an air of superiority. Shaq couldn't help but feel a pang of familiarity. This was the Terry he remembered, quick to assert dominance, eager to belittle others. But something about the interaction felt different now. There was no malice in Terry's words, just frustration, as if the years had worn him down. As the hours passed, Shaq decided to test the waters further. He approached the desk, pulling out a bottle of water from his backpack. "Thirsty?" he offered, holding it out to Terry. Terry raised an eyebrow, eyeing the bottle suspiciously. "What's in it?" Shaq laughed, a deep, genuine sound that seemed out of place for his disguised persona. "Water, mate. Just water." Terry hesitated before taking the bottle. He unscrewed the cap and took a sip, his gaze never leaving Shaq. "You're a strange one," he said, setting the bottle aside. Shaq leaned against the desk, his body language relaxed. "Strange how?" he asked, feigning innocence. Terry shrugged. "Most people like you don't stick around. They take the hint and move on." Shaq tilted his head, his eyes narrowing slightly. "People like me?" Terry's expression faltered, realizing his choice of words. He quickly backtracked. "I mean, you know, just people who don't have anywhere else to go." Shaq nodded slowly, the weight of Terry's words hanging in the air. He decided to push further. "And what about you? You ever had nowhere to go?" Terry stiffened, the question catching him off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" Shaq shrugged. "Just wondering. Life's funny like that. One day you're on top, and the next you're just trying to get by." Terry's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Shaq thought he might lose his temper. But instead, Terry let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, well, you don't have to tell me about life. I've had my fair share of bad breaks." Shaq nodded, choosing his next words carefully. "Guess we all have. Some more than others, though." Terry's eyes narrowed, his suspicion growing. "You've got a lot to say for someone who doesn't even belong here." Shaq smiled faintly, stepping back. "Maybe. Or maybe I just know more than I let on." The tension between them crackled like static electricity. Terry's unease was palpable, and Shaq could see the wheels turning in his mind. He wasn't sure if Terry recognized him yet, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. As Shaq walked away, he glanced over his shoulder, catching a glimpse of Terry watching him intently. He could feel the guard's curiosity growing, and with it the cracks in Terry's facade began to show. The next encounter would be critical. The next evening, Shaq returned to the building, his disguise intact but his demeanor slightly different. He carried himself with a quiet confidence, his every move deliberate. tonight was the night he would force Terry to confront his past, whether he was ready or not. The lobby was eerily quiet as Shaq pushed open the glass doors. Terry was at his usual spot behind the desk, scrolling on his phone, his expression etched with boredom. When Shaq entered, Terry glanced up, his face immediately tightening with annoyance. "You again," Terry grumbled, setting his phone down. "I don't know what your deal is, but you can't keep coming back here. This isn't some hangout spot." Shaq approached the desk slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Relax, mate. I'm not here to cause trouble. Just wanted to have a little chat." Terry's eyes narrowed, his suspicion deepening. "What's there to chat about? You've got 5 minutes and then you're out." Shaq leaned against the desk, his gaze steady and unflinching. "You ever think about the past, Terry? About the things you've done?" Terry blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What are you talking about?" Shaq smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hinted at hidden knowledge. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. You weren't always sitting behind a desk barking orders at people. You used to be a different man, a cruel one." Terry's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "You don't know me," he said coldly, "so why don't you stop pretending you do?" Shaq tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Don't I? Funny, because you sure seemed to know me back in the day. You made it your mission to remind me every chance you got." Terry's eyes widened ever so slightly, and Shaq could see the gears turning in his mind. Recognition flickered, but Terry quickly shoved it down, refusing to acknowledge it. "You're talking nonsense," Terry muttered, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Shaq straightened, his tone growing sharper. "Am I? Let me jog your memory. Schoolyard, lunchtime. A big kid with a mean streak who thought it was funny to pick on the quiet kid. Ring any bells?" Terry's face drained of color, his composure cracking. He stared at Shaq, his mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. "No, it can't be," Terry whispered, his voice barely audible. Shaq reached up and pulled off his fake glasses, the first piece of his disguise to go. The thick, nerdy frames clattered onto the desk, revealing the familiar sharpness in his eyes. "It's me, Terry," Shaq said, his voice calm but laced with an undeniable edge. "The quiet kid you used to shove into lockers. The one you made fun of for wearing secondhand clothes. The one you laughed at when he said he'd be somebody one day." Terry's breath hitched, his hands gripping the edge of the desk as if to steady himself. "Big Shaq," he said, the name falling from his lips like a weight. Shaq nodded, his expression hard. "Yeah, that's what they call me now. But back then, I was just the kid you thought would never amount to anything." Terry stumbled over his words, his usual bravado completely gone. "Look, I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean what, Terry?" Shaq interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Didn't mean to humiliate me? To make me feel like I didn't matter? Or didn't mean for me to remember?" Terry's face crumpled, his defenses finally breaking. "I was a stupid kid, all right. I didn't know any better. I didn't think—" "You didn't think," Shaq repeated, his tone cutting. "And now here you are, the same man sitting behind this desk, judging people who walk through that door. Have you changed at all, Terry? Or are you still the same bully, just with a different uniform?" Terry looked down at his hands, shame etched across his face. "I've changed," he muttered, but there was no conviction in his voice. Shaq stared at him for a long moment, letting the weight of the silence settle between them. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, placing it on the desk. "What's this?" Terry asked, his voice shaky. Shaq's gaze softened, though his tone remained firm. "It's a letter I wrote to myself back then. Every insult, every shove, every time I felt like giving up because of you. I carried it with me for years, and now I'm giving it to you. Maybe it'll remind you of the man you don't want to be anymore." Terry unfolded the letter with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the words. His face twisted with emotion, regret, guilt, and something deeper. "You've got a choice, Terry," Shaq said quietly. "You can keep running from the past, or you can face it and be better. It's up to you." Shaq turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Terry alone with the letter and his thoughts. The lobby felt heavier now, filled with the echoes of a confrontation that had been years in the making. The following morning, Terry sat at the desk, his eyes red from a sleepless night. Shaq's words and the letter weighed on him like a heavy stone. He reread it over and over, each line cutting deeper than the last. It wasn't just a list of wrongs. It was a mirror, forcing him to see the kind of person he had been and the damage he'd caused. When Shaq walked into the lobby again, this time dressed in his regular clothes, Terry immediately stood up. His posture was different, no longer defensive or hostile, but open and almost vulnerable. "Chuck," Terry said, his voice soft. Can we talk?" Shaq raised an eyebrow but nodded, walking over to the desk. "I'm listening." Terry took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I don't know where to start, man. I read your letter, and I can't believe I was that person. I was so blind to the harm I was doing, and not just to you, probably to others too. I'm ashamed." Shaq studied him, his expression unreadable. "Shame's a start, but it's not enough, Terry. What matters is what you do with it." Terry nodded, swallowing hard. "I want to change. I need to. I don't want to be that guy anymore. I don't want my kids to look up to me and see someone who made others feel small just to feel big." Shaq crossed his arms, leaning slightly on the counter. "Good. Then start by treating everyone who walks through that door with respect. Doesn't matter how they're dressed, what they look like, or where they're from. Give them the dignity you didn't give me back then." Terry nodded again, his face earnest. "I will. I promise." Shaq gave a small smile, one that carried both forgiveness and a challenge. "All right, I'll hold you to that." As the conversation ended, a group of teenagers walked into the building, their clothes baggy and their laughter loud. Terry's old instincts kicked in for a split second, but he caught himself. Instead of scowling or shooing them away, he smiled and greeted them politely. Shaq noticed and gave him a subtle nod of approval before heading toward the elevator. Later that evening, Shaq sat down for an interview on a late-night talk show. The host asked him about his latest project, expecting to hear about music or endorsements. Instead, Shaq leaned forward, his tone serious. "You know, people talk about bullies like they're just kids in school. But the truth is, some of them grow up and keep being bullies. They just wear different uniforms. I had a chance to confront one of mine recently. It wasn't about revenge, though. It was about showing him that it's never too late to change." The host leaned in, intrigued. "And do you think he'll change?" Shaq smiled, his eyes thoughtful. "I think you will. Sometimes all it takes is holding up a mirror. But the real change comes when you decide to stop hiding behind excuses and start doing better. That's the message I want people to take away. It's not about where you've been, it's about where you go from here." The audience erupted into applause, and Shaq leaned back, satisfied. As the credits rolled, viewers across the country reflected on Shaq's story. Some thought about the bullies they'd faced, while others wondered if they'd been the bully in someone else's story. The lesson was clear. Accountability and growth are choices, and it's never too late to make them. Wherever he was, Terry sat at his desk, smiling at a customer and feeling lighter than he had in years. From where are you watching this video? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear it.